Hey guys, it's Kingdom Orange 2 here, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I will be analyzing the Winx Club Iceberg that was created by user Taman Vanya over on Reddit. Now, if you're unaware about how an iceberg works, basically the top tiers contain topics that are pretty well known about a subject, and then as you go further down the iceberg, the examples begin to become more obscure. Real quickly though, before we get into it, I just want to give a huge thank you to both WinxClubNewsflash for helping me with the research on some of these iceberg topics, as well as Taman Vanya on Reddit, who is not only letting me use this iceberg, but also really helped me explain some of these unfamiliar entries. Alright, so with all that out of the way, let's get right to it. Winx Club. I was gonna write a description here, but if you genuinely didn't know what Winx Club is, then you definitely for sure wouldn't have clicked on this video. Unless you were super bored, and in that case, welcome. Eugenio Straffi. Eugenio Straffi is an Italian animator and former comic book author who is best known as the creator of Winx Club. Born in Gualdo, Italy in 1965, Eugenio had a love for drawing, often creating comic book stories in his high school classmates' notebooks. After college, he began working with multiple comic book publications, but his first big shot was when he got a job as a storyboard animator for Telsima Animation Studio in France. It was there he gained more experience about each stage of the animation process, and in 1995, Eugenio decided to move back to Italy where he founded Rainbow SPA, an animation studio that initially provided creative services for larger companies until it secured enough funds for original productions. It was also during this time Eugenio Straffi began working on a pilot that centered on the conflict between two rival colleges, one for fairies and another for witches. This concept eventually expanded into what we know now as Winx Club, a show that Eugenio hoped would fill the void of female heroines in action cartoons of the time. Another thing I want to mention before we move on is that the character of Bloom is based on two women from Eugenio's life. Bloom's backstory is based on his college girlfriend named Antonella, who had a strong desire to meet her biological parents. Bloom's personality, however, is based on his wife, Joanne Lee, a woman he met in Singapore in 1997, and who also serves as the executive producer of the show. Fate the Winx Saga. After many years of Eugenio Straffi shipping the creation of a live-action Winx Club around, his idea finally came to fruition in 2021 with the creation of Fate the Winx Saga. Intended for the older fans of Winx Club who grew up with the show, the Netflix series portrays a more mature take on the first 3 seasons, with Bloom, a fairy from California, going to Alfea, a boarding school in the otherworld, to find out more about her powers and her past. The show only ran for 2 seasons and was widely criticized by both Winx fans and viewers alike for multiple reasons, including its exclusion of certain characters like Tekna and the Tricks, its lack of transformation sequence, its horrid fashion, and its cringe adult content. Never in my life did I ever think I would hear Riven joke about Bloom's pubic hair, but ladies and gentlemen, here we are. However, if you are someone who just really enjoyed the show's plot, Matt Clave Studios created a graphic novel that follows where the show left off, and they plan on releasing the 2nd volume later on in July of this year. World of Winx. World of Winx was a 2-season, 26-episode spin-off that aired on Netflix in fall of 2016. The first season follows the Winx back in Gardenia as they work as talent scouts for a hit reality TV show. Unfortunately though, multiple talented individuals become kidnapped, and it's up to the Winx to find the identity behind the talent thief and the reason why they are doing so. Eventually the Winx discover that the talent thief is a corrupt Tinkerbell, and the 2nd season focuses on the Winx, who are no longer on a TV show but in a band, as they try to restore Tinkerbell to her former self and save Neverland, which is also known as the World of Dreams. Now, World of Winx is a bit strange because the events of this series seemingly take place after season 4, as Roxy appears in the show as well as the fruity music bar. However, most of the plot focuses on the Winx trying to hide the fact that they're secretly fairies, and the series actually ends on a cliffhanger with a reporter named Venomia, who is actually Baba Yaga in disguise, threatening to expose the Winx's secret to the world. This show is also the first time we see the fairy couture art style in animation. This art style was actually introduced in 2012 and was used on a wide variety of Winx Club merchandise, as it was meant to be modeled after high-end fashion sketches. If you'd like to know more about it, TalkyTilki actually has a great video about the fairy couture art style, which I will include in the description down below. 4Kids. 4Kids was an American film and licensing company that was responsible for dubbing multiple foreign shows into English. They were heavily focused on Americanizing their shows as much as possible, done so by editing animation frames, changing music, and rewriting plots. All of these examples were carried into the way they edited their version of Winx Club, such as changing background and transformation music, censoring transformation outfits that they deemed to be inappropriate, changing location names and plot details, and cutting and readjusting scenes to allow more time for advertisements. Honestly, the amount of modifications 4Kids made to Winx Club is so vast that it would take an entire video to explain all of them. However, some of their changes will be mentioned later on as we go deeper into the Iceberg. Now, 4Kids aired their version of Winx Club in most majority English-speaking countries such as the USA and the UK, but at the time it wasn't the only English dub, as Senilum in Canada also created their own much more faithful and accurate adaptation that was aired in various other speaking markets such as Singapore and the Caribbean. 4Kids was only able to dub the first 3 seasons of the show, as Rainbow revoked their license in 2009, and it seems that Eugenio Straffi was always unhappy with the changes 4Kids made to Winx Club, even stating in a 2008 interview about 4Kids that the Winx fairies cannot talk about boys there. I think this removes something essential. Regardless though, the 4Kids TV block was ended in 2012, and the entire company went bankrupt 5 years later in 2017. Comics. Probably due to the fact that Eugenio Straffi was a comic book writer, since 2004, Rainbow SRI has simultaneously released a Winx Club comic book series that is featured in their monthly Winx Club magazine. The magazine initially started out as somewhat of an abridged retelling of the show's episodes, with the writers slightly altering some of the plot details. However, as time went on, it began featuring its own exclusive story arcs and characters, such as the Civil War in Heraklion, which I'll talk about later on in this Iceberg, or Manuel, a specialist who also serves as a love interest for Roxy. The comic series is also known for its multiple exclusive fairy forms, such as the Magic of Joy, Greenix, and Paintix. As of this video, the magazine has released over 200 issues, but only 72 of them have been officially translated into English. Now, over the years, Viz Media, as well as Paper Cuts, have gone back and compiled many issues of the comics into larger books, but neither company has yet to get past issue 72. However, if you're still interested in reading them, there are multiple fan-created translations that can be found online. Rai, not to be confused with Rainbow SPA, the animation studio behind Winx Club. Rai is an Italian broadcasting company that is actually owned by the Ministry of Economy and Finance. In relation to Winx Club, not only did its production company, Rai Fiction, help finance the show, but Winx Club is aired on multiple different Rai channels, including Rai Due, Rai Gulp, and Rai Yo-Yo. Now, I do want to also quickly mention that the Senilum dub is often referred to as Rai English due to its faithfulness to the Italian script. However, this is somewhat misleading, as the Rai company was not in charge of making it. Nickelodeon. In September of 2010, it was announced that Nickelodeon was partnering with Rainbow to bring Winx Club not only back to America, but also to a wider variety of worldwide audiences through Nick's various international channels. Viacom, Nickelodeon's parent company at the time, then purchased a 30% stake in Rainbow SPA. Since Winx Club had already aired 4 seasons and 2 movies by this time, it was decided that in order to catch the audience up faster, 4-hour-long specials based on the first 2 seasons would be produced, with Nickelodeon fully redubbing seasons 3 and 4. Season 5 became the first season entirely co-produced by Nickelodeon and Rainbow, with Nickelodeon approving scripts and animation and also bringing in their own creative directors and voice talent, which comprised of popular actors and actresses from various other Nickelodeon shows. Season 6 was created in a much similar way. However, during the production of Season 7, Rainbow underwent a significant financial loss due to the poor box office performance of their movie Gladiators of Rome. So in order to cut costs, they fired the Nickelodeon voice talent and went with a cheaper dubbing agency called DuArt. They also decided against animating scenes with the newer CGI that was introduced in Season 5. For season 8, since the majority of the American staff was busy working on another joint production, Club 57, Nickelodeon only served as a consultant role, rather than overseeing the entire season. Eventually, however, in January of 2023, Eugenio Straffi bought back the stake that Viacom purchased in his company, but Nickelodeon would continue to be a broadcast partner for the studio. Books. The magazine isn't the only form of written Winx publications, as over the years, Rainbow has produced a wide variety of books and novels. Now, most of these works aren't anything to write home about, as a lot of them are just companion novels that are either character encyclopedias or chapter books which retell events from the show. However, once in a while, Rainbow will publish some very interesting full-length picture books or novels, which may even feature some unique fairy forms. Other than that though, there really isn't much to say about them, so that's it for the first layer. Pop Pixie. Pop Pixie is a 2011 short-lived miniseries that centers around the Pixies from the second season of Winx Club. The show itself, though, heavily diverges from what is pre-established in the Winx Club canon, such as the Pixies no longer living in Pixie Village, but in an urban city called Pixieville. In Pixieville, society is divided into 4 classes, with the Pixies at the top and the lawless, unworking elves at the bottom. While the plot of this series typically follows a gag-per-episode format, one of the main storylines in the show is when a Pixie transforms into a Pop Pixie, which is done by gaining a magic pop or an orb that comes from the Tree of Life. A Pixie gains her magic pop when they do a good deed, and through this form, a Pixie gains larger wings and spells which they can use to solve a problem or de-escalate a situation. Though there are many more changes that the writers made in the Pop Pixie lore, some of these changes were implemented into the canon of the Winx Club show. For example, when the Pixies return in season 6, Musa and Tecna's bonded Pixies are changed from Toon and Digit to Kara and Cherie, 2 Pixies that were introduced in Pop Pixie. Also, the outfits that the Pixies now wear in Winx Club are based on their Pop Pixie redesigns, rather than what we initially saw in season 2 of the show. Magic Bloom. Before Winx Club was a series we know of today, the show was originally going to be called Magic Bloom. The pilot of this show was produced over a 12-month period in which Rainbow ran multiple animation tests, market surveys, and character studies. While Rye Fiction initially seemed to love it and even agreed to pay for 25% of the production costs, Eugenio noticed how the test audience of the pilot seemed unhappy with the character's outdated style, and on the brink of an existential crisis, Eugenio Straffi decided to completely scrap it. In 2018, at the Luca Comics and Games convention, Eugenio Straffi showed the audience the original Magic Bloom transformation sequences, as well as other clips from the pilot, and as recently as last year, for a celebration of 20 years of Winx Club, Eugenio and his team shared photos of each of the Winx initial character designs. Through these photos, we learned that not only was Stella going to be named Sasha, but Musa was originally named Lisa, had green hair, and wielded a magic flute. Also, Flora was going to be Caucasian, wore glasses, and had light purple hair. Characters' birthday dates. This entry has to do with the fact that when you go onto each character's individual pages on the Winx Club website, it lists their birthday. Years ago, the website actually had a Curiosities tab, which also listed more fun facts about the characters, such as their favorite food and favorite subject. And because 4Kids always felt the need to make as many unnecessary changes as possible, some of the Winx characters, such as Bloom and Stella, have the date of their birthday changed. Also, fun fact, Aisha and I share a birthday on June 15th. Winx Club PS2 PC game. In 2006, Konami produced a Winx Club video game that was available on Game Boy, PC, and PS2. In the game, you play as Bloom and mostly reenact scenes from the first season of Winx Club. I assume the reason why this game was included on this Iceberg is that during gameplay, you actually meet and interact with a ton of students from Alphea that are never actually featured on the show. If you're interested in seeing more of this game, many people have uploaded recordings of them playing it on YouTube. Winx Just Fairies. Before Winx Club was chosen as the official name, the working title for the cartoon was Winx Just Fairies. So far, a logo and some production images which show the Winx in slightly different civilian outfits have been found, but it doesn't appear as though Winx Just Fairies had any significant plot changes than the first season of the show. Reboot. Just in case you've been out of the loop for the past few years, Winx Club was officially ended in 2019 with an entirely new rebooted cartoon set to air later this fall. Now, the way in which the reboot came about is a bit confusing, so Just bear with me. It seemed as though only a year after season 8 aired, Rainbow decided that they wanted to reboot the show by first announcing that season 9 was going to be rebranded as Winx Club Shorts, which would have featured 52 episodes of 13 minutes rather than the usual 26 episodes of 22 minutes used for the past 8 seasons. Eventually, promotional artwork of the Winx's new civilian forms were released, as well as artwork of Flora, Stella, and Bloom's new fairy forms. However, as the years went on and Eugenio Straffi was constantly announcing new updates about the upcoming season of Winx, somewhere along the line, it seems as though the idea for a rebooted season 9 was scrapped in favor of an entirely new show. Now, as of me writing this script, we only have a trailer and a photo of what the new fairy forms will look like, but even since the trailer's release, it seems as though some of the character designs are still being edited, so I guess we won't truly know what the reboot looks like until it's released later this year on Netflix. Bloom Peters. While Bloom's surname is never mentioned on the show, according to a 2005 book titled Winx Club Secret Powers, Bloom's last name is Peters. Now, even though it seems as if the writer of this novel could have made it up, that's not actually the case, as in Fate the Winx Saga, when Bloom looks through a scrapbook of her baby photos, her name is listed as Bloom Peters. This may mean that Rainbow at least initially intended to use Bloom's last name in more media, but decided against it for some reason or another. Princess Musa. While Musa is just a civilian from the planet Melody in most versions of the show, in the 4Kids dub, Musa is made into a princess who hails from a planet in the Harmonic Nebula. Now, in order for this to make sense in the show, her dad Hobo's backstory is changed from being just a starving artist to a prince who was disowned by his family for pursuing a life as a musician. Also, when Musa meets Galatea in season 3, Galatea is no longer the princess of Melody, but instead the princess of a planet called Harmonia, which is also located in the Harmonic Nebula. Real quickly though, not only is this backstory completely stupid, but why would Hobo be disowned for being a musician, especially since he's from a musical planet? But if Musa's dad had his title rescinded, she would technically be a commoner and not a princess. Season 8 art style. While subtle art changes have been made in both the Winx's 2D and 3D character models over the years, none were as drastic as the change to the 2D art style in Season 8. The Winx were drawn to appear much younger than the previous seasons, with smaller circular eyes replacing their typical, more massive anime-like ones. The main reason behind this change was Eugenio Straffi's hope that the show would appeal to a much younger demographic, with a new target audience being preschool children. Now, what's even crazier about this season, besides the specialist having as much muscle mass as a 12-year-old boy, is that the art director Simone Borselli, who designed the characters for the first 7 seasons, wasn't asked back for season 8, which probably explains why everything looks so ugly. Tecna is a cyborg. By definition, a cyborg is a person whose physiological functioning is aided by or dependent upon a mechanical or electronic device. In Season 1, Episode 5, when talking to Bloom and Musa, Tecna states that she had not been programmed for dating, and when Bloom suggests she tries it anyway, Tecna leaves and heads to bed, where she states that it's time to switch herself off. Now, this dialogue seemingly hints at the possibility that Tecna is a cyborg. However, it's never officially stated anywhere that Tecna is any type of cyborg, android, or robot. I think this dialogue was just placed in to further convey how Tecna struggles to relate to the other girls and with voicing her emotions, often acting in somewhat of a robotic way. Season 6 was supposed to be about space. So according to a 2013 Rainbow SRI press release, Eugenio Straffi claimed that Season 6 was going to take place in outer space. Now, I have searched and searched the internet looking in both Italian and in English for this exact quote, but I've never been able to find it. However, I have found multiple forums in which people mention Eugenio Straffi saying this, so this leads me to believe that either A, he did actually say it, but the press release was just an oral statement that was never well documented, or B, that this was just a rumor that someone made up on the internet and it spread very fast. Now, to be completely fair, this isn't entirely outside the realm of possibility, because around the same time, there was another rumor going around that the Season 6 transformation was going to be called Cyberix. Roxy is the 7th Winx. This statement has to do with the fact that when Roxy was first introduced, she was heavily marketed and referred to as the 7th member of the Winx Club by both Eugenio Straffi himself and in merchandise. However, as soon as season 4 was over and the new season began, Roxy went from playing a major role to somewhat of a background character. Now, while we don't know what season 5 was going to be about before Nickelodeon partnered with Rainbow, it's widely speculated that Roxy was initially going to play a much more important role, as the Genio Strophe said at the Las Vegas Licensing Expo in 2010 that all 7 fairies would have been active members in the upcoming season. However, in my personal opinion, as much as I love Roxy, I'm just a bit confused on how they planned on incorporating her into the club, because not only is she a couple years younger than the Winx, but the writers at Rainbow couldn't even really decide on whether or not Roxy was technically a Believix fairy. Winx on Ice. Winx on Ice was a touring ice skating show that ran throughout Europe in both 2008 and 2010. The storyline was centered around a young girl from Earth named Carolina who loves to write poetry. One day, Faragonda poses as the shopkeeper and gifts Carolina a magical diary in which everything she writes between its pages becomes true. The diary transports her to Alfea, where she is intercepted by the Tricks, who convince Carolina to use the power of the diary for malicious purposes, causing Carolina to be transformed into a witch. The Tricks then take Carolina to Valtor, who tries to persuade the young girl to use her diary to write about the death of the Winx. Fortunately though, the Winx find Carolina and after a short battle are successfully able to convince the girl to become good once again. And the show then ends with Carolina using her magical diary to write an end to Valtor. Now, while I know the majority of Winx fans have probably never seen Winx on Ice, I believe that many fans of Winx are probably aware of the vast range of media that was released to accompany the show, such as a toy line which featured a doll for Carolina, a DVD, a novel that recaps the show's events, and a soundtrack. In fact, the ice skating outfits from the show's promotional artwork have been consistently reused in other Winx Club media, such as in the Winx magazine issue 56, Magic's on Ice, or in this video for Dreamin' in My Way on the Winx Club in Concert visual music video album. Male fairies, witches, and pixies. There aren't any male students at Alfea, as fairies are meant to be exclusively female. However, in both flashback scenes of Domino as well as a courtyard shot of the castle in the second movie, there appears to be male fairies with wings. This could also refer to how in Fate the Winx Saga there are male fairies like Sam, who's an earth fairy. The same thing for the fairies applies to the witches, except in the animated show they're called wizards. Or this refers to how in Fate the Winx Saga, the leader of the Blood Witches is Sebastian Valtor, who's clearly a man. Finally, there's no male pixies in Winx Club, but Pop Pixie does introduce some new male pixie characters such as Fix-It, or the wide variety of female characters that were just randomly turned into boys for Pop Pixie, such as Digit, Livy, Zing, and Jolly. The disappearance of Charmix. The goal of the Winx in Season 2 was to earn their Charmix, a power-up that works alongside their standard fairy form and helps boost their magical abilities. While the Winx all individually earn their Charmix and use it to defeat Valtor, the power-up is noticeably absent in Season 3. So I went back to rewatch Season 2 to see if there's any mention of Charmix being a temporary transformation, and unfortunately I was unable to find that, which leads me to believe that the lack of Charmix's appearance in Season 3 could have been that the animators wanted to save time in the episodes. Rainbow and Nickelodeon did at least try to rectify this situation by getting rid of it entirely and calling the standard fairy form, which was never given a proper name besides in the 4Kids dub, their Charmix. Background character names. While watching Winx Club, you've probably noticed the unique designs of many different background characters that fill the halls of both Cloud Tower and Alfea. Typically, these students' identities will remain unknown, but sometimes they receive names on the show or in supplemental Winx media such as the comics or on the website. Now, because these characters are mostly unimportant to the plot, the story writers at Rainbow will often forget what name they originally gave them, such as Francine being called Priscilla or Katie being named Nessa, Spica, and Hortensia at different times. In fact, last year, the Winx Club page on Instagram shared a series of posts which contained pictures and powers of many different students at Alfea, but they didn't even bother in giving their names. Palladium is in love with Avalon. In the 20th episode of Season 2, Palladium and Avalon are out looking for magic when Avalon pretends to be poisoned by a venomous flower. Unaware to Palladium, this was all a ruse of Dargar to find the location of Pixie Village so that Ice-Key could steal a part of the Codex. Palladium takes Avalon back to Alfea, where he is eventually nursed back to health, and the scene ends with Avalon thanking Palladium, with Palladium blushing and saying, "There's no need to thank me," before the screen fades to black. Due to this episode, many fans believe that this scene indicated that Palladium may have had feelings for Avalon, and will often ship the two of them together. Unfortunately though, it doesn't seem as if Rainbow got this memo, as in the Winx Club magazine issue 125, the Winx reunite Palladium with his long-lost lover, who is corrupted and trapped inside the Legendarium world. Pixies are originally Earth creatures. In Season 12, Episode 13, when the Winx travel to Gardenia, we find out that pixies are only visible to children on Earth, even though the reason why is never exactly stated. This plot point is expanded on inside of a Russian pixie magazine titled Santa's Little Helpers. In the comic, the pixies are feeling weak, and while Laquette and Chata are out shopping in Gardenia around Christmas, they notice how children seem to walk straight past them without acknowledging their existence. The duo then learn that the children have altogether stopped believing in magic, and this all began when they stopped believing in Santa Claus. Laquette and Chata head to Pixie Village, where Nymphia tells them that without the belief of children, the pixies will lose their energy source. So with that in mind, the pixies team up with Santa and spread Christmas cheer to the children of Earth, with the comic ending as the children are once again able to see the pixies and believe in Santa. Because this comic seems to establish a connection between a child's belief and the pixies' existence, it could technically be theorized that the pixies originally came from Earth, but may have left when the Wizards of the Black Circle took over. Now, while the show doesn't ever go too deeply into the pixies' existence in history, what we do know is that Pixie Village can be moved. So with that in mind, who's to say that the pixies didn't just teleport themselves and their tree to magics for safety? I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that the writers at Winx Club linked two entirely unrelated events to one another. I'm looking at you, Daphne and Cyrenix. Golden Elves. According to this Pop Pixie comic, unlike the mean-spirited and lazy elves that live in Pixieville today, there once were golden elves who were kind and well-behaved. Unfortunately though, for hundreds of years the golden elves have been asleep, but randomly today, two of the golden elves have finally woken up. Now the comic that was provided to me was entirely in Russian, and I've been unable to find all of the pages, but it appears that Caramel eventually takes the golden elves to Molly Moo, where they have some cocktails, before they are attacked by three elves on the riverbanks. Real quickly though, before I move on, I just want to point out that the Pixie and Pop Pixie magazines are a disaster to find information about online. Not only were issues of the magazine exclusively released in some countries and not others, but nobody on the internet has been able to fully catalog how many magazines exist. It's almost like how it's really hard to know what a Witty Toys Winx Club doll will look like because there's so many different stock images that leak online for them. Darcy is Griffin's daughter. In a flashback of season 3, we get to see what Griffin looked like when she was younger, and viewers were quick to point out the striking resemblance that Griffin had to Darcy, so many fans on Reddit often like to create headcanons that Darcy is actually Griffin's daughter. This isn't entirely impossible, as we never do meet the Trix's parents in any form of media, but if Griffin was intended to secretly be Darcy's mother, we probably would have known by now. Exclusive Russian games. Around 2009, a series of 10 CD computer games were released to coincide with the premiere of Season 4. And from the footage I've been able to find, the gameplay appears to be pretty simple, even though I'm not entirely sure what's going on because everything is in Russian. Now, I've seen some people online say that the games were exclusively released in Russia, but that's not entirely true, as the CDs were also released in the Czech Republic and Poland, just under a different distributor. I also believe that this entry might have something to do with the Winx Club Russian website having some sort of exclusive games on it, but I couldn't find any specific examples of that being the case. Miss Magix is banned. In Season 1, Episode 12, titled Miss Magix, Stella competes in a beauty competition and goes on to eventually win the crown. In the middle of the episode, there's a scene where a contestant is upset because she claims that her straight hair suddenly turned into an afro, and as she runs away crying, Bloom heavily suspects that it was the Trix who did this. Now, due to the racial connotations of this scene, Rainbow completely removed it from their YouTube channel around 2020. However, it's still available on Apple TV and some Amazon Prime Video releases. Also, something interesting I want to note is that 4Kids actually edited this scene to where the contestant was crying about her squeaky voice instead of her hair. Mermaidix. Mermaidix is the fan name of an aquatic fairy form that first appears in the novel Mermaids, The Winx in the Undersea World of Andros, as well as its sequel, pearls. In the novel, the Winx are granted this transformation by Queen Ligeia as a way to better use their powers underwater, and the fairies use it once again when they need to find answers in Andros's underwater library. What's a bit strange to me though is that mermaids clearly have wings in both the Winx Club show as well as in this novel, and I always theorized that this was the reason as to why the Winx weren't given tails in their Sirenix form. But regardless to whether or not my theory was true, this fairy form was given its own doll line in 2013 called Magic Ocean, which featured Bloom, Flora, Stella, and Aisha in their mermaid outfits. The dolls also came with their own CD, which included games, as well as a digital book that contained an abridged version of the two novels. Nickelodeon specials pushed seasons 1 and 2 out of canon. Since obviously the Nick specials are much shorter than the runtime of season 1 or 2, a couple of storylines from the main show were either changed or left out. For example, Bloom doesn't pretend to be Princess Veranda of Callisto, and the Codex is no longer 4 pieces, but a single tablet that Icy steals from Pixie Village. But what I think this entry is referring to is how in season 6, while the Winx are trying to locate the Children of the Night, they stumble upon a field where Bloom tells Stella this was the location where they first met, and then a flashback from the first Nickelodeon special is shown instead of a scene from the first episode. Honestly though, there's nothing in season 5 onward that recalls events during season 1 or 2 that weren't part of the Nickelodeon specials. So while seasons 1 and 2 might not technically be considered canon anymore, they're still treated as such by fans. Well, except for the fact that in the Nickelodeon specials, Avalon is just Darkar in disguise, even though Professor Avalon makes an appearance in season 3, but we'll just talk about that one a bit later. Aisha in season 1. The 12th issue of the Winx Club magazine, titled Magic Battle, features an abridged retelling of the final 4 episodes of season 1. But interestingly enough, is the first time we actually meet Aisha. In the comic, Bloom becomes lost trying to locate Lake Rockaluce, but unbeknownst to her is being watched by Aisha and the Pixies. After deciding that she is a friend and not a foe, the Pixies agree to create a breeze that points Bloom in the right direction, while Aisha remarks that she will probably meet Bloom again sometime in the future. The comic was released a month before season 2 aired, but served as a fun little Easter egg without ruining the show's or the comic's continuity. Reboot leak. Early last year, concept art of the Winx reboot began to spring up on the internet. Included in these various leaks was a scene of Mitzi confronting Bloom in the girls' bathroom. 2 different versions of this scene were leaked, with slight alterations in the animation style. Because of these leaks, Rainbow decided to release a first look of the reboot, which featured a scene of Bloom frustratingly sketching in her notebook before accidentally setting the book on fire. However, like I mentioned earlier on in this Iceberg, we still aren't entirely sure what the reboot will look like, but it appears as though some of these character designs will make it into the final look of the cartoon. Whitewashing. Whitewashing is a casting practice in the film industry in which white actors are cast in non-white roles, and in Fate the Winx Saga, both Terra, who was originally going to be named Flora, and Musa are played by white actresses. However, this isn't the only time in which Winx Club has found themselves in a controversy over whitewashing, as it appears in both World of Winx and Season 8 that Aisha and Flora had their skin lightened. Now, while doing research for this entry, I noticed just how much Rainbow would seemingly play around with both girls' skin tones. For example, Rainbow initially fixed Aisha and Flora's World of Winx skin tone on the Winx magazine covers, but then after a couple issues, they'd whitewash them again. And for the Season 8 covers, Flora and Aisha are even more whitewashed than they were in the cartoons. Riven's mother left him because of money. So according to an old post on the Winx Club website, Riven's mother abandoned him for money when he was younger, and that's why he has a distrust for girls. Honestly, this gives somewhat of an explanation for his hostile attitude towards Musa and Bloom, but I just find it a bit strange and somewhat comical that they didn't feel the need to elaborate on this. Like, what exactly does "for money" mean? Darkar's monsters are still alive. So at the end of Season 2, when the Winx finally defeat Darkar, his entire fortress begins collapsing, so the Winx and the Specialists quickly head out. Now, in the comics, in issue 19, Monsters on the Loose, the Winx, the Specialists, and some witches from Cloud Tower are assigned on a mission to go and get rid of any leftover monsters that survived the cave-in. However, not only did they never go inside of Darkar's fortress, but the monsters they track down are like these lame shadow monsters that look nothing like the creepy creatures from the TV show. On top of that, this comic is just kind of boring. Like, how many times do I have to see Stella get jealous of another girl flirting with Brandon? Masha. Masha is a character from a Russian stage show called Winx New Year's Adventures. This show ran in Moscow from December 21st, 2013 to January 8th, 2014. Its storyline is very similar to Winx on Ice, with the Winx traveling to Earth to find a girl named Masha. Masha is then taken to Alfea, but she constantly fails when trying to learn magic. Out on a walk, Masha is trapped by the Tricks, who take her to Heraklion, where they bewitch her and Sky and turn them into a loving couple. Luckily though, the Winx are successfully able to break the Tricks' spell, and the show ends with the Winx and Masha celebrating the new year. Is Buddy real? In Season 3, Episode 15, Bloom is sent to Pyros, aka the Island of Dragons, to become stronger. While on Pyros, Bloom receives a vision from Daphne, who tells her that in order for Bloom to become stronger, she must look and find the inner dragon within herself. After Daphne fades away, a small dragon named Buddy appears, asking Bloom for assistance, as he claims to have been separated from his parents and needs help finding his way back to Molten Lake. The duo then navigate around the island as Buddy teaches her various ways to behave like a dragon, and in the end, when they reach home, he tells Bloom that he is her dragon, and the two of them embrace. Now, in the next episode, Bloom is once again alone on the island of Pyros, with Buddy nowhere to be seen. So many fans have theorized that Buddy was somewhat of a figment of Bloom's imagination, as once she embraces that he is part of her, Bloom no longer needed his guidance. However, as much as I think this theory is well thought out and interesting, I don't believe the writers at Rainbow meant to be that deep, as Buddy makes another appearance, this time as a grown-up dragon in the 2014 book titled Cora de Fata. Justin Bieber. Justin Bieber, the Canadian singer and former teen heartthrob, is mentioned in both Winx Club as well as Pop Pixie. In The Mystery of the Abyss, Musa tells the Winx she needs them to make a lot of noise, and when they are unable to, mentions that she's heard way more sound at a Justin Bieber concert, before Stella interrupts and points out she likes Justin. Well, Musa doesn't exactly say Justin Bieber, she just says Justin B, and then gets cut off, but it's pretty obvious who she's talking about. Also, in the 12th episode of Pop Pixie, an elf pop star named Justin Nimble comes into town to sing at a charity concert that will benefit the Bumble Monkeys, and you can clearly see his hairstyle and look were heavily inspired by the Biebs. So maybe this just proves that a Geniostrophe is secretly a believer? Pixies are xenophobes. So originally when I read this entry, I thought it had to do with the fact that Pixieville is surrounded by a magical barrier, or how Pixie Village was hard to locate in Season 2. But I was told it actually relates to the way pixies generalize their attitudes towards the gnomes and elves, believing that all gnomes are greedy and that all elves are mean-spirited and lazy. Now, my problem with this statement is that, well, yes, the pixies do exhibit some prejudiced behavior, like when Lockette's dad calls Mr. Rollo just another rude gnome. The elves and gnomes in Pop Pixie are written to be inherently lazy and greedy. I haven't found any examples of like a gnome trying to share his wealth or an elf trying to do good, because if I did, then I could see more what this statement was trying to get at. Nobody in this show is a human, where prejudice like this is just way more complicated. Also, I don't believe xenophobic is the right word, because while the gnomes shuttle into the city, it's not like the pixies talk about their hate for outsiders. I would argue that the right word would be more like specious or something. Transformation of Earth Fairies. I've actually spoken about this before on my channel, but the Earth Fairies are truly unique to most of the fairies we see in this show. Unlike most of the fairies in the Magic Dimension, the fairies of Earth seem to come in many different subspecies and appear to remain entirely in their fairy form rather than having to transform into it. Now, you could argue that since Earth Fairies are technically their own species, this rule and others, such as if they have higher fairy forms and individually unique powers, doesn't apply to them. However, Roxy's existence sort of completely ruins this argument, as she's an earth fairy who transforms, has a fairy form, and is the fairy of animals. Heck, even Morgana is shown to have a civilian form. Unfortunately though, I think this was all just an oversight by the writers, so I don't believe the Winx or Roxy could ever gain a transformation that resembles the major fairies of Earth. Lookism. Lookism is defined as the construction of a standard for beauty and attractiveness, and judgments made about the people on the basis of how well well or poorly they meet the standard. In relation to Winx Club, the writers have a couple instances where they seem to view the idea of wearing glasses as making a person unattractive. For example, in Winx Club Magical Adventure, the Winx put a pair of glasses on Bloom, hoping that it will deter potential suitors, even though this plan ultimately fails because it only makes her seem more attractive to Prince Strufus, or whatever his name is. Another example of this in the show would be how Stella was perceived as an unattractive child, partially due to her glasses, even though it doesn't seem like her face was entirely different than it is now. Rex's great-grandfather. In the series finale of Pop Pixie, the barrier around Pixieville begins to disappear, and in this chaos, Rex falls through the street and finds the magical staff of his great-grandfather, Shinobi, the former leader of the elves. With this staff, Rex summons a flock of wild creatures and threatens to destroy the Tree of Life unless Nymphia tells the elves the secret of flying. Scared for the tree and without her magic wand, Nymphia agrees to give the elves wings, but Rex and his crew continue to destroy the tree anyways. Luckily though, in the end, Nymphia gets her wand back and is able to defeat Rex, but the series kind of ends without the elves getting any sort of punishment, so I assume this was done on purpose in case they wanted to use the elves as villains again in season 2. Season 5 version fully in 3D. The second trailer that was released to promote the 5th season of Winx Club is nearly identical to the first, with one key difference. At the end, there's a very short scene of Stella wearing her new civilian outfit and admiring her looks in a mirror. The interesting thing about this scene is it's entirely in 3D, which was eventually only used in season 5 for the portions in which the Winx were in the Infinite Ocean. Since the scene seems to be very out of place, many fans have speculated that season 5 was initially made in 3D before it was scrapped in favor of 2D. However, I highly doubt that's the case, because even though the 3D animation was crappy looking to not just me, but most other Winx fans, it's actually more expensive than the 2D animation is. Musa is the real abuser in Revusa. While I don't believe that a single person would agree with this statement, what this entry is trying to imply is that even though most of the relationship problems come from Riven, Musa isn't entirely innocent. Now, when rewatching the show, the only instance where I felt like I could 100% put the blame on Musa was when she freaks out over Riven not complimenting her hat. There's also this scene in season 8 where she gets angry because Riven hasn't called her, even though she was the one who broke up with him. Regardless, I've seen some fans on Reddit point to the relationship between Musa and Jason Queen as season 4 as an example of Musa's wrongdoing. And to this, I call bullcrap, because despite me being able to somewhat see where these fans are coming from, Musa didn't even develop feelings for Jason until right before her and Riven broke up. And it's not like Musa and Jason ever did anything. You could also technically point to how Musa straight up believed Riven was cheating on her, despite him just trying to take guitar lessons from that Althea fairy. But I mean, he was being really sketchy about it. Could he not just get guitar lessons from someone, I don't know, like ugly? Pepe's status. In the 3rd episode of the 1st season, the Tricks get an unpleasant surprise when instead of Stella's ring being hidden inside of a magical egg, out pops a purple baby duck named Pepe. Pepe then appears in the next couple of episodes following the Tricks around, much to their annoyance, but eventually after the Army of Decay rises, Nut believes it's no longer safe for him at Cloud Tower and takes Pepe to Althea. Pepe then meets Kiko and the two of them become close friends. However, when the Tricks are captured and sent to Light Rock Monastery, Pepe follows behind, much to Kiko's sadness, with Bloom explaining to Kiko that Pepe wants to stay with his mommy. However, after this, we never see or hear about Pepe again, so he's either living his best life at Light Rock Monastery, or Icy turned him into duck liver pate. Civil War in Heraklion. One of the comic exclusive plots involves a civil war that takes place in Heraklion and spans over the course of 8 issues. The civil war itself was a bit confusing to understand, but basically in the first 3 comics, we learn that there is an ongoing political struggle in Heraklion, and multiple attempts are made at both Sky's and his parents' life. While this is all going down, Sky does try to live a normal life at Red Fountain, but is constantly surrounded by security and has to fly back and forth between Heraklion and Magix to show support for his family. The civil war comes to a head when rebel forces, who are backed by the kingdom of Corunda, which I guess is one of the many kingdoms of Heraklion, but that's never really explained, takes control of the capital, and the king and queen seek refuge in an undisclosed location in the mountains. The war eventually spreads to the entire planet of Heraklion, and Sky has to return home and join his parents for safety. Sky does promise to write Bloom, but he becomes worried that the sending and receiving of letters will expose enemy forces to the location of his whereabouts, and since he claims that he doesn't know how long the war will last, actually decides to break up with her. We find out later from Brandon, though, that this was only done so that the mercenaries wouldn't kidnap Bloom and hold her hostage as an attempt to blackmail Sky. In the end, though, Sky's troops are able to defeat the rebel forces, and the Civil War ends with his family getting the throne back. Farragonda was originally a witch. Much like Murda, who I will talk about right after this entry, Farragonda was also a witch before she decided to be a fairy. This tidbit of information comes straight from a page on the old Winx Club website. However, it is rumored that the fact was also mentioned in the informational book Encyclomagia 2 Enchantix Power, though I can't confirm it myself because there are very few photos of this book available online. Regardless though, the fact that Farragonda was a witch is never actually mentioned in the show, which I find a bit strange because we never actually see a young Farragonda in her fairy form either. Murda was supposed to be a Winx. Murda is the name given to a witch who was introduced in season 1 of the show. Unlike most other students at Cloud Tower, Murda wants to befriend the Winx fairies, and at the end of the season decides to transfer to Alfea and become a fairy herself. Now, due to Murda's unique goth aesthetic and relationship with the Winx, many fans have theorized that she was meant to join the club, but was scrapped in favor of Aisha. Another theory is that she wasn't added to the Winx because of her heavy resemblance to Will from Witch, a TV show from Disney that actually sued Rainbow for copyright infringement after they alleged the Winx Club concept was stolen from their comic. As we all know, this lawsuit was eventually dismissed, but was one of the reasons why Eugenio Straffi refused to work with the Walt Disney Company in the future. The writers don't like Tecna. WinxClubNewsflash actually made a hilarious and really well done video about this, but due to a variety of different reasons, it almost appears as if the writers at Rainbow don't seem to really like Tecna, as she will usually have the shortest transformation sequences, the smallest amount of screen time and character development, and is the least likely member of the Winx to be featured in merchandise. I mean, Tecna is literally erased from the entire Fate the Winx saga canon, mostly due to the fact that they didn't think her technological powers fit the more nature-based aesthetic of the show. Now, I don't actually believe the writers dislike Tecna. I just think it has more to do with them struggling to balance the storyline of 6 girls. However, the only way we would truly know the answer to this question is if you individually asked all the screenwriters at Rainbow. Romance between teacher and student. When the fake Professor Avalon first arrives at Alfea, many female students, including the Winx, are easily smitten with his good looks. Avalon, however, gives them no attention, but agrees to help Bloom discover more information about her history and birth parents. After class, the two frequently meet up, which causes Sky to grow jealous, and he accuses Bloom of having feelings for her professor. However, towards the end of the season, it's revealed that Professor Avalon was just a fake sent by Darkar to corrupt Bloom into becoming evil. Now, when rewatching this season, I tried to look for examples of inappropriate behavior between Avalon and Bloom, and never actually found any instances of Avalon or Bloom flirting with each other or engaging in unacceptable conduct. Bloom does occasionally blush from time to time, but that's really about it. However, this entry could also be describing how some Winx fans like to ship Flora and Palladium together because they're both fascinated by plants and potion making, but I find that to be a bit weird. Cyrenix's wish is useless. When Flora finally pleases Destiny, she uses her Cyrenix wish to make the people of Earth respect nature. Unfortunately though, this wish is kinda useless for a variety of reasons. First of all, it's already the responsibility of the Earth Fairies to help humans learn how to take care of the planet. There's also the fact that the third movie literally opens with someone dumping a barrel of oil into the ocean, so clearly her wish had little to no effect on the people of Earth. Flora probably should have just used her wish to get back at Princess Crystal for trying to steal her man. Helia is Dargar. This is a fan theory submitted by a user on VK, which, if you didn't know, is a hugely popular social media website in Russia. Now, because the theory was written in Russian, the English translation provided by Google Translate was pretty crappy and hard to understand. So I'm going to try to best summarize what I think the original poster was getting at. This user on VK first gives a bunch of different reasons as to why they believe Helia is Darkar in disguise. First, there's little information given to us about Helia's past, other than the fact that he was friends with Princess Crystal during his childhood, and that he originally dropped out of Red Fountain to attend art school before re-enrolling. Helia is also referred to as a pacifist, which seems to be a misrepresentation of his true character, as Helia shows no hesitation when he almost blows up the Trix with the specialist spaceship. The user then argues that Helia isn't a spy like Avalon, but more of like a shadow puppet controlled by Darkar, similar to the elemental clones of the specialists used by Valtor in the final battle of Season 3. Now, they get into more reasons that I really found a bit hard to understand, probably due to the translation. But for example, they say that Darkar left Helia's body in Season 2, and that explains how they were able to fight against one another. But then they joke about how the real Helia would never allow himself to get that horrible haircut given to him in Season 4, so he must be a fake. The VK user also provides their own contradictions to their theory, which, again, I struggled a bit to comprehend what they were getting at. However, one thing I do know for sure is that this user definitely thinks that Helia is a creepy and mysterious individual. The fish offered Amore to mate. In episode 2 of Pop Pixie, Amore accidentally turns herself into a fish after she makes a potion which she hoped would help her swim. The Pixies discover that they can reverse the effects of the potion by having Amore bathe in the 7 streams. But when Amore finally gets in the water, she's constantly harassed by another fish who keeps trying to kiss her and tells Amore to surrender to the call of nature. Now, I guess you could interpret that the fish was trying to mate with Amore. However, surrendering to the call of nature is code for going to the bathroom and not mating. Also, I don't think fish actually mate with one another in an intercourse-y type of way, but I haven't really looked that deep into it. Dark Bloom is still inside Bloom. In Season 2, Bloom is first changed into Dark Bloom by a shadow spell cast by the fake Professor Avalon, but is later on fully transformed after she gets captured by Lord Darkar. Luckily though, this dark form doesn't last, as after Sky professes his true feelings towards Bloom, she uses the power of the Dragon Flame to heal herself, transforming her back to good. Now, while we never see a villain in Winx Club try to turn Bloom evil again, many fans like to speculate on the existence of Bloom's dark form. Could it be that deep down this inner darkness was always inside of Bloom, but Darkar was the only one able to coax it out of her? I mean, while the Winx are training at Cloud Tower, Griffin does point out how easily it seems for Bloom to summon her negative feelings. Like, what stops Bloom from giving in to her dark side again? It's an interesting theory because Bloom really is capable of probably becoming the most powerful evil being in the magic dimension, but I just can't ever see that happening because Bloom is, you know, Bloom. Yilladith. Yilladith is the master of the fairy hunters who was first introduced in Winx Club comic issue 133. Originally defeated by the major fairies, he was imprisoned inside the school of Tir na Nog, but was able to trick 2 students into freeing him. When asked why the Wizards of the Black Circle hadn't freed him years ago, Morgana mentions that Ogron wanted to take his place as leader of the fairy hunters, so they decided to leave him there. Now, once freed, Yilladith begins to attack the Winx, but he's eventually defeated, this time forever, with a Bloomix convergence. Selena was forgiven for trying to kill Flora. In Season 6, Selena persuades Bloom into letting her inside of Althea's greenhouse, and then tricks her into giving Flora a vial of poison, which Bloom almost drops into her mouth before being stopped by Palladium and the Specialists. Despite this definitely classifying as some sort of manslaughter charge, this incident is never brought up again by the Winx to Selena. In fact, at the end of Season 6, Selena practically gets off scot-free as Eldora agrees to train her once again. Bloom Tour. Bloomtor is the name given to the ship of Bloom and Faltor. Many fans of the show seem to like this pairing for reasons I'm not quite sure about, but probably because a lot of people love that enemies to lovers trope. Interestingly though, around 2020, Winx Club English uploaded a compilation video with a Photoshop thumbnail of Bloom and Faltor together. Now, Winx Club English was a YouTube fan account, but over the years there was heavy speculation that Rainbow actually provided Winx Club English with their videos. So I wholeheartedly believe that they approved the creation of this thumbnail. And if that wasn't enough proof for you, Rainbow eventually just bought the channel and turned it into the official Mermaid Magic YouTube. Believix power brainwashes people. Believix grants each of the Winx girls a special power in which she can use to help people believe in magic so that the fairies can become stronger and eventually defeat the Wizards of the Black Circle. The unique spells typically work by manipulating the emotions and thoughts of the targeted human, either by calming them down, inspiring courage, or by healing them. Now, you could argue that these spells actually brainwash people because they influence Gardenia's citizens into behaving in a way that they might not normally act. In fact, Aisha asked Bloom to use their Believix powers on Bastian to manipulate him into letting them inside of his barn. However, while the Winx's actions technically meet the literary definition of the term, the word brainwashing has mostly a negative connotation, which is exactly the opposite of what the Winx do, as they never actually use their powers for any sort of malicious purposes. No one will graduate Althea. According to Faragonda in Season 3, in order to pass your third year and final examination, a fairy must earn their enchantix. Every member of the Winx Club is successful in doing so, and they all graduate on the day of the gift in The Secret of the Lost Kingdom. However, as early as Season 5, the Winx once again begin attending classes at Althea, with the writers never fully explaining why exactly they are doing so, other than the obvious reason of it being an easy way for the Winx to be able to touch base with one another. This also refers to how we will often see the same students at Althea year after year, which is obviously done for the animators to save money. But if you really think about it, maybe the reason why the fairies are still there is because they never earn their enchantix. Where did False Avalon go? Towards the end of Season 2, a shadow clone of Avalon kidnaps Bloom and takes her to Lord Darkar, where she finally learns the truth. However, after this episode, the fake Avalon just completely disappears. He doesn't even fight the specialist when they come to rescue Bloom. So many fans have wondered what ended up happening to him. Now, unfortunately, we'll never really know, but it seems as though the fake Avalon may have died when Lord Darkar's fortress fell apart. The Lost Halloween Special. TalkyTilki does a much better explanation of this, so I will link one of her videos in the description down below. But in prototype promotional photos for the doll line Halloween's Monster Mission, we can see that not only was the line going to be initially called Lady Hallowinx, but the pamphlet contains a pitch for a webisode which mentions how the Winx disguise themselves in Halloween costumes to infiltrate a party thrown by the Tricks so that they can find a secret formula and save the planet of Althea. Now, while this description doesn't really make any sense, especially since Althea isn't a planet, there were never any webisodes made to coincide with the doll releases, as instead the writers at Rainbow decided to advertise the doll line in 3 different Winx Club magazine issues. However, if you watch the doll commercial for the Halloween's line, you'll notice that it features animated scenes of the Winx in their Halloween costumes, which many fans theorize may be clips from the Lost Halloween webisodes. Now, it could totally be that these clips were solely made for just the doll commercial, but I still wonder as to what exactly the pitch on the pamphlet was. I honestly think it would have been really cool to go see the Winx go undercover as witches, even though these costumes don't really scream witch to me. Naboo is still alive. During a battle in Season 4 against the Wizards of the Black Circle, Naboo dies after using all of his energy to close the abyss. This event is confirmed in Season 5 when an illusion of Naboo berates Aisha for letting him die. However, it appears as though at the time of Season 4's release, Rainbow wasn't entirely sure about killing off Naboo, as not only does Morgana explicitly say that she will watch over Naboo until he wakes up, but Naboo appears alive in the second Winx Club movie, and is also seen dancing at the Fruity Music Bar in some promotional footage for Season 5. As recently as 2024, when asked by a fan at the Napoli Comic Con if Naboo was still alive, Eugenio said that Naboo just disappeared and wasn't actually dead and may reappear in the future. But in all honesty, I totally totally believe that this was just lip service to shut fans up who've probably asked him the same question over and over again. Allusions to abuse and slavery in comics. The 55th issue of the Winx magazine, titled Temptation, opens with a young witch named Wendy being reported missing from Cloud Tower. Recently, there has been a string of kidnappings throughout Magix where female students have been whisked away and forced into magical trafficking rings. At the same time, Riven has been emotionally distant and secretive, so Musa decides to break up with him. She begins chatting online with a boy named Tristan and eventually agrees to meet up with him one night at the lake. Unfortunately though, it turns out that not only was Tristan fake, but he was part of the trafficking ring, and Musa is tied up and shoved into the back of a van. Luckily for her though, Riven is hot on her trail and is quickly able to rescue Musa. With the kidnappers now in police custody, it's later revealed that the reason behind Riven's frigidness was due to the fact that he was secretly working with the law officers to take down these criminals, and when he noticed that Musa didn't appear with the rest of the girls at the White Horse, heavily suspected something was wrong. This, however, wasn't the only comic in which adult subjects were somewhat sanitized to be kid-friendly. In issue 27, Darko the Black, Darko, the son of a wealthy mafia head in Magix and childhood friend of the Tricks, makes a bet with his friends that he can get Bloom to go out with him. Because Icy secretly has feelings for Darko and wants to impress him, she gives Darko a love potion, which he slips into Bloom's drink during a party at the White Horse. The potion makes Bloom instantly fall in love with Darko, and she leaves the party with him. Sky, though, notices something is off and chases Bloom and Darko with his car. This causes a crash, and in the hospital, Bloom eventually learns what happened to her. The comic ends with Bloom and Stella going back to the White Horse to see if there's camera footage of the event, but Icy has secretly destroyed the bar's tapes. The Lost Christmas Special. We all know the Christmas episode from season 5, but according to fans on Reddit, there was allegedly a Christmas special planned for season 3 as well. Now, annoyingly, I was unable to find even a smidge of information about it anywhere on the internet. However, while messaging a user on Reddit about this special's existence, they claim to have remembered seeing scripts for it many years ago on the Winx Club wiki. So with that in mind, it could very well be true that there was some sort of Christmas episode planned for season 3 that was eventually scrapped, but until more information comes forward about it, we will never truly know if it was real or just a very well fabricated rumor. Speaking of lost specials though, according to this image snapped at the Bologna Children's Toy Fair in 2012, Nickelodeon did plan on releasing a mermaid special sometime in 2013. Unfortunately though, again, this seems to be the only tidbit of information we have about its existence. How did the Tricks get out of the Relix's dimension? Towards the end of season 2, the Tricks confront Darkar about sharing the ultimate power of Relix, but instead of listening to their complaints, he laughs and sends the Tricks to oblivion. The trio of witches, however, manage to escape oblivion by merging themselves into one entity known as the Megatrix, and head to the Relix dimension to confront Darkar. The battle ends with the Winx destroying Darkar with a Charmix convergence, and the Winx specialist and Pixies flee out of the fortress as it begins to collapse. As this is all going down, we see a scene of the Megatrix stuck in the Relix dimension as everything begins to collapse around them. Season 3, however, opens with the Tricks being separately dropped into the Omega dimension, which led many fans to wonder how exactly the Tricks were able to separate and escape the Relix dimension. Now, most of you who have watched the show for a long time know that the writers will often randomly place the Tricks in prison wherever they need them for plot's sake. For example, at the end of season 3, the Tricks were sent back to Light Rock Monastery, but in season 5, they are for some reason trapped underwater in the prison of Antros. Now, Rainbow has seemingly realized that they made a major mistake, and in the Nickelodeon special, The Shadow Phoenix, they completely got rid of the Megatrix storyline, with Lord Darkar sending the Tricks back to Light Rock Monastery, which sort of fixes the plot hole. But in all honesty, the real question we should ask ourselves is not how the Megatrix got out of Relix, but how did they get there in the first place? Don't you need the Codex to do that? Russian girl starts fire trying to become Winx Fairy. In 2017, The Mirror reported on a story about how a 5-year-old girl named Sofia in Russia was horrifically burned after switching on a gas oven and taking the wooden sticks and waving them onto her clothes. The girl claims to have been following the instructions of the Fire Fairy game, a photoshopped fake Winx photo that listed nefarious instructions on how someone could become a fire fairy, which included switching on a gas stove and leaving it overnight so that when the child wakes up, they will breathe in the magic gas. Luckily for Sofia, her sister told their mother about the smoke smell before it was able to burn down the entire house. Now, this incident led to a bit of a panic, with many people believing that kids were trying to take part of this online Fire Fairy challenge. However, according to Snopes.com, this hysteria really had no basis, as not only was Sofia the only child to be injured this way, but the Fire Fairy challenge meme had been circulating Russian internet for years. It's sort of like that creepy bird woman statue that I'm not entirely sure if I'm allowed to mention on YouTube yet. Kiko is an enchanted guard from Domino. This one is a bit of an odd theory, but the fan notes how Kiko seems to display a peculiar amount of intelligence to a normal pet, as not only is he able to walk on his hind legs, but can seemingly communicate and understand the Winx. There's also the fact that if Kiko was just an ordinary pet from Earth, then how was he able to pass through the magical barrier of Althea? Could it be that Kiko was once Bloom's guard that was sent by Daphne to Earth to watch over her? Now, Kiko has displayed times in which he has shown to have more of an authoritative side, like when he watches over the fairy pets in season 4 as well as the fairy animals in season 7. And technically, I don't think we've ever seen Bloom adopting Kiko. However, if Kiko was truly Bloom's enchanted guard, I feel like he would have at least told her that in season 4 when he gets the ability to speak, or have somehow written it down. 20 million miles to Earth. Earlier in this Iceberg, I mentioned how in 2006, Konami made a Winx Club video game that was available for PS2, computer, and Game Boy. Well, according to the Cutting Room Floor, which is a website dedicated to researching unused and cut content from video games, the Winx Club game contained a file which had a creepy scene from the movie 20 Million Miles to Earth, a 1957 film that centers around an alien from Venus which crash lands off the coast of Italy. Now, to be completely transparent with you guys, this website was so vague that I'm not even really sure what's going on here. I assume that the only reason we know about this is because someone got a hold of a demo of the game, went through its subfolders, and then submitted this evidence to the wiki. So with that in mind, I don't think kids were buying this video game, clicking around, and stumbling upon this creepy video. But again, I'm not entirely sure. This wiki also mentioned how this clip might have been placed in the game to test conversion into the M1V format, which I read that M1V is apparently a way of storing video files separately from audio. But I'm not a tech wizard, and hopefully someone in the comments might know a little bit more about this and enlighten me about what's going on here. Okay, the last entry on the Iceberg today is Seasons 4 through 8 are Bloom's fantasy trapped in obsidian. According to a Genius Trophy, Winx Club was initially planned to have a 3-season story arc, with the movie set to resolve any of the plot points remaining in the 3rd season finale. However, since Winx Club was so massively popular, a Genius decided to extend the series, which led to the show running for a total of 8 seasons and finally coming to an end in 2019. Over the years, as Winx Club continued on, many fans have voiced their disappointment with the further seasons, even believing that the show should have truly ended in season 3 like it was originally planned. So with that in mind, this theory takes those fans' complaints into account and states that Bloom never truly made it out of Obsidian, and that every one of her continuing adventures with the Winx was all in her head. What we know for sure about Obsidian is that it's a dark and dangerous place, and when the Winx arrive there, they become lost and plagued with nightmarish visions. This theory could technically explain the multiple plot holes and inconsistencies that tend to plague the later seasons of the show. However, some of my issues with this fan theory is that it's pretty obvious that Bloom only survived Obsidian because she's the keeper of the Dragon Flame. If she was just a regular Joe Schmo fairy, she probably would have been trapped there just like Farragonda warned. Also, Obsidian isn't the dimension where you get trapped inside of your nightmares. It's actually Oblivion, where Bloom yet again is the only one able to wake herself up. Regardless though, I do love these "it was all a dream" or "it was just a simulation" tropes, and I like how this fan was able to apply it to Winx Club. If you liked this video today and want to see more content in the future, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and I will see you soon. Bye!